Hi, I'm Jonah Comstock, editor-in-chief of pharmaphorum. I'm here at Reuters Pharma USA with Matt Wadyka, the chief client strategy officer at Inizio Medical. We're going to talk a little bit about what we're seeing and hearing here at the show, and thanks for joining me, Matt.
Oh, pleasure, Jonah. Appreciate it.
So, tell me a little bit about what your work at Inizio entails.
Sure. I joined Inizio about a year and a half ago, and the emphasis I have is about kind of unlocking different client strategies to understand kind of where we can provide support from a communication strategy, medical strategy, even commercial strategy, and access strategy, and help kind of teams realize how they can bring their products successfully to market.
So, Reuters Pharma is a conference often very focused on marketing and commercialization side of the pharma world, and they get a lot of good speakers from the big pharma companies you've heard of. What are some of the big conversation topics and trends that you're hearing about as you meet with folks at the conference?
Sure. I think the two things that are pretty fundamental going forward that I've heard a lot about is number one, the changing landscape in terms of diagnosis, treatment, and care. And I think the biggest change, of course, is the role of the patient in that regard. And you see it from a lot of companies. Most of the companies we've heard from have some kind of a direct to patient opportunity now. And it's kind of both addressing certain cost concerns, access concerns, but also putting the power back in some of the patient's hands. So I think that's one of the most that's going to be the biggest change over the next 5 to 10 years. And the second that I think is critical is how it does, like you said, it's commercialization focus. But the reality is there is a need for better medical information, unbiased medical information, honest medical information to get to the end user's hands. And so that's a role where medical affairs can play. So even if it is a commercialization forward meeting, I would say the role of the science in the right people's hands is pretty critical. And that's been another topic that I've heard a lot about.
Yeah, I mean, I think those two topics are really linked together, and I
Sure.
agree. I've been hearing both, but the way that I would say they're linked together is that the more that pharma companies invest in direct to patient, not just sales, but
Yeah.
communications, the more that sort of big question of like, are you doing marketing or are you doing communications becomes important, and the more that you have to ask the question of like, where are the patients going for trusted information, right?
Yeah.
Because that used to be their PCP.
Yep.
Not everyone has a PCP. Not everyone sees their PCP very often.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, I'm so interested in kind of how that's evolving, and
Yeah.
also like if every pharma company wants to have its own direct to patient offering, how does that not become a big siloed mess, right?
Yeah. Well, it can be. It's a big siloed mess. And I think if you look at industry trends over time, you'll find companies starting to act independently at first because it's a direct kind of cash infusion line where you don't have to work with additional third parties. So like that's clear and that's pretty obvious. But the more they, like you said, the more they silo themselves, the more they're going to realize that the patients are going to be the ones that are going to suffer the most, especially if you're dealing with like most ailments, like most diseases or issues. It's never singular, meaning that you are likely taking, if you are if you're a patient who suffers from cardiac disease, you're likely taking 2 to 3, if not 4 different medicines, and they're not all going to come from the same manufacturer. And so how we navigate that is going to be a little bit based on not just the direct to patient options, but also working with hospital settings and finding ways to kind of navigate that. And that's where, from a group like Inizio, we're trying to find what are those more third party ops where you can take, like, imagine you have a, like, if you look at, like, right now, Amazon has the Amazon stuff, but it also has all their other little independent stuff that feeds in. We're not at a point where we can say this is a direct to patient op with all of those direct things kind of plugged in. But in the future, that is likely going to have to be some kind of an option, especially if you're going to actually give the patients the kind of voice that they're probably seeking in time. The other difficulty becomes, and again, we're in a different space because we work in this industry. So it's easier for people like us to be able to discern truth from fiction. But the general populace still has a really difficult time discerning truth from fiction. So I think the first step in this is having what are the tasks that you can take to help to rebuild some trust with kind of the broader kind of patient population, so that you can give them information that they can really practically use.
Yeah, and then AI becomes such a double edged sword in that conversation because it can, a good AI agent can be an unbiased source of data, but it also can get things wrong and isn't always, shouldn't always be trusted. So how does that fit into the evolving landscape, do you think?
AI fits in everywhere. It's going to be the question is going to be, um, AI falls into a couple different camps. So number one, it should be a tool that is used to fast track thinking, to kind of to expedite, so to speak. But it shouldn't be the single source, because it is essentially a regression to a mean, meaning that it kind of gives you like the mean results of everything. It takes all the high end, takes all the low end, and gives you something like dead center. And it's all not always comprehensive. That's some of the stuff's not in the public domain. Some of the stuff hasn't been fed into the algorithms. So like some of the stuff's not really going to be there. And so you're going to have to find another balance. And that goes to my point about like recognizing truth versus falling into fast solutions for the sake of solutions. And then the third part of AI is you can also use it as like a checkbox, like an exercise in I was diagnosed with and I'm getting prescribed this. What are my other options? So like it can also be a use kind of after the fact as a check-in, just to be like, what other things are available? Because doctors don't necessarily come in and tell you you're diagnosed with X, I'm going to prescribe you. But if you don't want that, let me show you all of the other options. They don't come in with that list for you. So it's good for kind of people to have that ability to kind of do a bit of a check in to say, well, what else is available just in case so that I know, and you put again that power back in their hands.
Um, I guess since you're in sort of a position where you're not maybe more free to talk about certain things than an actual pharma person would be. Let me ask you, what's the role that sort of the current weird policy landscape plays on
Uh,
these questions about trust and these also like the DDP thing? Because I mean, with
yeah.
Trump RX, it feels like the government wants to put pressure on to have more DDP. It wants to be involved as a player there, but there are some questions about kind of how much real value is being added there.
Yeah. So I'm going to leave the Trump RX one to the side, just because I would just say look at the medicines that are on there, and see what their current cost is versus others. I'll just leave it at that. And on the DTP, it goes back to that same point of trust because, like again, remember that the as someone who worked in pharma for the large like a portion of their career, um, we did an exercise asking the basic question: Who do you want to hear from? Would you want to hear from the company, or do you want to hear from a third party? And the answer is kind of resoundingly from a third party because the company is biased; they have something to sell you, and that's why I say the DTP stuff I think is critical from an architecture perspective to get the architecture down to facilitate the process and to get there to be some comfort both on the patient level but also on the physician level, on the hospital level, right? Just insurance level, just so there's some like, once you get that machinery moving, then it's a matter of kind of correcting the machinery over time to say, all right, how do we avoid some of the inherent biases that come with a company being the only avenue when there's more of a there when there is a potential for a third party to come in and be a bit more of a consolidator over time.
So, any final thoughts? And this has been a really good conversation, and I sort of validated because I what you've mentioned as sort of the key trends is also what I think I've been hearing a lot as sort of what people are talking about here. But big takeaways, especially for pharma folks
Sure.
trying to navigate this stuff.
Uh, my first one is, um, I know obesity's got headlines because it's all over the news and everything. Um, there's a lot of different marketplaces in this industry to keep an eye on that are really in need of adjustment, not just the obesity space. So the sooner we can move on from just talking about obesity and move to other spaces and putting other spaces into context, that would be amazing. Um, that's, I guess, the first thing. The second thing is the focus on, and I mentioned truth when it came to patients. I think it's easy to judge what people know based on how they answer some basic questions. And it's also easy to assume that an individual is less informed. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't know who to go to, right? We all have friends, we all have family members, we all have people we could trust that we have questions. I have several friends who are physicians that when I have questions, I go to them directly and I'm not shy about it. I have several family members who come to me because I'm from this industry and I know how to help you look. So, like, we should remember that in terms of how we engage and reinforce the need for us to be trustworthy, right? Organization to organization. The more you get, the more people feel promoted to, the more people will move on.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Matt. Really good
Appreciate it.
conversation.
All right. Thanks, Jonah.